Sometimes the world mistakes quiet people for ordinary people until one forgotten name changes everything. The revolving glass doors of Langford Technologies reflected the gray morning sky as Ethan Caldwell paused for a single heartbeat before stepping inside. His worn brown jacket carried the faint scent of laundry soap. His boots had seen better winters, and a neatly folded application in his hand was creased for being checked one too many times during the bus ride downtown. Around him, polished marble floors gleamed beneath warm lights. Employees hurried past with coffee cups bearing the company logo, and digital displays celebrated another record-breaking quarter. No one noticed the man standing near the entrance except the security guard, whose polite smile quickly faded into suspicion. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, glancing at Ethan's clothes before looking toward the service hallway. "I'm here for the janitor interview," Ethan answered calmly. The guard looked at the paper, nodded once, then pointed toward a quieter corridor. Maintenance applicants used the back waiting area. Ethan simply thanked him and walked away without the slightest hint of embarrassment. He had learned long ago that dignity was never measured by the direction someone pointed you. As he disappeared down the hallway, two young employees stepped aside to let him pass. "Looks like somebody got lost," one whispered with a chuckle. "At least he dressed for the job," the other replied. Ethan heard every word, yet his expression never changed. Silence had become a habit, not because he lacked answers, but because peace always mattered more than pride. He settled into a simple chair outside the facility's office, smoothing the wrinkles from his application before checking the time on an old wristwatch. Lily would finish school at 3:15. If this interview ran long, he would still find a way to reach her before the final bell. That promise mattered far more than anything waiting behind the office door. A receptionist hurried across the lobby carrying a tablet while speaking nervously into her headset. "The presentation starts in less than 20 minutes. The lobby display is completely frozen. IT still can't get it working." Her anxious voice echoed through the otherwise elegant building. Several managers gathered around a massive interactive display mounted on the wall. Investors were expected to arrive any minute, and the screen stubbornly showed nothing except a blinking system error. Frustration spread quietly across the lobby. One technician restarted the system. Another unplugged cables before reconnecting them. A third shook his head in defeat. Ethan watched for a moment from his chair. He hesitated, knowing it was none of his business. Then he stood, walked over slowly, and spoke with the same gentle tone he used whenever Lily struggled with homework. "Would you mind if I took a quick look?" The technicians exchanged uncertain glances before one shrugged. "Be my guest. It's not like it can get any worse." Ethan set his application carefully on a nearby table, rested one hand on the keyboard, and studied the frozen display with patient eyes. His fingers moved only a few times, calm and deliberate, almost as if he were greeting an old friend rather than solving a problem. Within seconds, the error disappeared. The company logo faded smoothly onto the screen, followed by the welcome presentation exactly as scheduled. The entire lobby grew strangely quiet. Before anyone could ask how he had done it, Ethan picked up his application, returned to his chair outside the facility's office, and waited for someone to call the name that almost everyone had already forgotten. The facilities manager finally stepped through the office door, holding a clipboard, and scanned the small waiting area without much interest. "Ethan Caldwell," he called. Ethan stood immediately, picked up his application, and offered a polite smile. "That is me, sir." The manager nodded and motioned him inside a modest office overlooking the loading dock instead of the impressive glass lobby. It was a practical room with gray filing cabinets, cleaning supply catalogs, and a coffee maker that had clearly worked harder than anyone expected. "Please, have a seat," the manager said as he opened the application. "My name is Richard Benson." Ethan thanked him quietly and sat with his hands folded in his lap. Richard adjusted his reading glasses and frowned slightly at the nearly empty resume. "You left most of your previous employment blank." Ethan answered honestly. "I have done many different kinds of work over the years. I only need an honest opportunity now." Richard looked up with curiosity. Most people applying here tell me they deserve more than this position. Ethan smiled gently. Every job deserves respect if it allows someone to provide for family. The answer lingered in the room longer than either man expected. Richard nodded slowly before continuing. The work starts before sunrise. Sometimes weekends. Cleaning offices, hallways, conference rooms, whatever needs attention. That schedule works for me, Ethan replied. Do you have any restrictions? Richard asked. Ethan hesitated for only a moment. Only one. I need to leave in time to pick up my daughter after school every afternoon. I have never broken that promise. Richard leaned back in his chair. Something about the man's calm voice reminded him of people who had carried responsibilities much heavier than buckets and mops. Before he could ask another question, someone knocked rapidly on the open door. A young assistant looked flustered. Mr. Benson, the executive floor wants to know who fixed the lobby display. Richard looked confused. I thought information technology handled it. They did not, the assistant answered. Security footage shows it was the applicant sitting outside. Both men turned toward Ethan. He looked almost embarrassed by the attention. It was only a small software issue, he explained. I noticed an initialization process had become trapped in a repeating sequence. The assistant stared. Our senior engineers have been working on that system all morning. Ethan simply shrugged. Sometimes fresh eyes notice simple things. The assistant hurried away without another word. Richard closed the application and studied Ethan more carefully than before. The worn jacket, the tired boots, the humble posture no longer matched the quiet confidence sitting across from him. Mr. Caldwell, he said softly, you do not seem like someone who has spent his life pushing a cleaning cart. Ethan looked toward the window where delivery trucks rolled into the service entrance under the bright autumn sun. Life changes people, he answered. Sometimes the most important thing is not who you used to be. It is who your child needs you to become. Richard was about to respond when voices echoed from the hallway. Executives moved quickly toward the elevator as if something urgent had happened upstairs. At the center of the group walked Victoria Langford herself, composed as always, yet unusually thoughtful. In her hand rested a copy of the visitor log, and her eyes stopped for the briefest moment on one name before the elevator doors opened. Ethan Caldwell. She whispered it almost silently, as though she had just encountered a memory she never expected to find again. Victoria Langford stepped out of the executive elevator with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that could change entire industries before lunchtime. Conversations softened as she crossed the polished lobby, her charcoal business suit perfectly tailored, her expression calm but unreadable. She acknowledged a few department heads with brief nods before stopping beside the restored presentation screen. It was running flawlessly now, displaying financial projections and welcoming international investors who would soon arrive. She turned toward her chief technology officer. Who repaired it? The executive cleared his throat. We are still confirming that. I asked a simple question, Victoria replied gently, never raising her voice. Who fixed the system? An uncomfortable silence settled over the lobby. Finally, the receptionist stepped forward. It was the maintenance applicant, ma'am. Victoria frowned slightly. The maintenance applicant? The receptionist nodded. He only touched the keyboard for a few moments. None of us really understood what he did. Victoria looked back at the screen, studying the transition animations with unusual attention. Something about the recovery sequence felt strangely familiar. It was elegant, efficient, and almost invisible. Years earlier, her late father had described that exact style during long evenings when he spoke about the engineers who shaped the earliest foundations of modern industrial automation. He had often repeated one sentence that never left her memory. The greatest minds solve problems so quietly that everyone else believes the problem fixed itself. Victoria looked toward her assistant. Bring me the applicant file. Within moments, a thin folder rested in her hands. She opened it while walking toward the executive conference hallway. The resume contained almost nothing. Temporary jobs, employment gaps, a mailing address in a modest neighborhood outside the city, one emergency contact, one dependent child. Then her eyes reached the name again. Ethan Caldwell. She stopped walking. Her assistant nearly bumped into her. Is something wrong? Victoria did not answer immediately. Instead, she whispered the name under her breath, as though testing whether memory could still recognize it after so many years. Ethan Caldwell. Her father had once shown her an old engineering journal filled with handwritten notes from a brilliant systems architect whose work had quietly transformed manufacturing across America before he disappeared from public life without explanation. That same name had appeared on several patents later purchased, licensed, and expanded by companies across the country, including Langford Technologies itself. Victoria slowly closed the folder, but her thoughts refused to settle. It could not possibly be the same man. The Ethan Caldwell she had imagined would be leading conferences, advising governments, or building billion-dollar companies instead of applying for an entry-level maintenance position. Yet the impossible software repair she had just witnessed refused to leave her mind. Down the hallway, Ethan thanked Richard Benson for the interview and accepted a simple visitor badge while waiting for the hiring paperwork to be prepared. He noticed a framed photograph of employees volunteering at a children's hospital and smiled quietly. "Your company does good work outside these walls," he said. Richard returned the smile. "Our chief executive believes success only matters when it helps someone else." Ethan nodded. "Your founder must have raised her well." Before Richard could respond, the office door opened softly. Victoria Langford stood there, composed and graceful, holding the application folder against her side. Their eyes met for the first time. Ethan offered the same respectful smile he had given everyone else that morning. Victoria, however, could not look away, because for the first time in years, she felt as though the past had quietly walked back into her company wearing worn boots and carrying nothing more than hope. Victoria remained standing in the doorway for several quiet seconds, studying the man before her with careful eyes that revealed nothing to anyone else in the room. Richard Benson immediately rose from his chair. "Good morning, Ms. Langford." She acknowledged him with a slight nod, but never took her eyes off Ethan. "Would you give us a few minutes?" Richard hesitated only briefly before leaving the office and gently closing the door behind him. The room fell into an unusual silence, broken only by the distant hum of elevators and the faint sound of rain beginning to tap against the wide windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Ethan stood respectfully. "Good morning." Victoria returned the greeting with measured professionalism. "Please have a seat, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan sat without asking questions. Victoria remained standing for another moment before taking the chair across from him. She placed his application on the desk between them. "You repaired our presentation system in less than a minute." Ethan answered calmly. "It seemed like a simple issue. Our engineering department disagrees. Sometimes complicated problems have simple answers." Victoria folded her hands together. "Where did you learn to understand systems like that?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Life teaches many things if you pay attention." The answer should have sounded evasive, yet somehow it felt completely honest. Victoria leaned back slightly. "You have almost no employment history listed here. Only the jobs that matter for this application." Ethan replied. "I'm applying to clean buildings, not impress people." His words settled over the room with quiet confidence. Victoria noticed there was no resentment in his voice, no attempt to appear mysterious, only a man speaking with complete peace about his circumstances. She opened the folder once more and stopped at his name. "Mr. Caldwell, has anyone ever told you that your name is well known in the technology industry?" Ethan looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "It used to belong to someone people expected too much from." Victoria felt her heartbeat slow. "Used to belong?" Ethan nodded gently. "The man I was spent years chasing recognition. The man I became learned that recognition cannot hug your daughter after a difficult day at school." For the first time that morning, Victoria found herself without an immediate response. She remembered evenings as a teenager, sitting beside her father while he reviewed old technical journals. One article had described an engineer whose revolutionary automation architecture quietly reshaped manufacturing across the country before disappearing without explanation. Her father had admired not only the work, but the character behind it. Brilliant people are easy to find, he had once told her. Good people are rare. She looked again at Ethan's weathered jacket, carefully polished boots, and tired but peaceful eyes. Nothing about him matched the public legend she had imagined for years. Before she could ask another question, her assistant hurried into the office, visibly anxious. Ms. Langford, the investors have arrived early, and there's another problem. Victoria stood immediately. What happened? The production simulation on the executive floor just crashed. The demonstration for the acquisition begins in 15 minutes, and the engineering team cannot restore it. The room grew still. Victoria instinctively looked toward Ethan. He did not speak. He simply waited, respecting that it was not his place to interfere. Yet as she remembered the effortless way he had restored the lobby system, one thought refused to leave her mind. Either this quiet father applying for a janitor position was an extraordinary coincidence, or the man sitting across from her was the same Ethan Caldwell whose forgotten work had helped build the very company she now led. Victoria looked toward the anxious assistant, then back at Ethan, weighing responsibility against instinct. Every executive lesson she had ever learned told her to trust the specialists. Every quiet memory of her father whispered something entirely different. Mr. Caldwell, she said carefully, would you be willing to look at the system before I make any decisions? Ethan remained seated for a moment, almost as though he wished someone else would answer in his place. If your engineers are already working on it, they should have every opportunity to finish what they started, he replied. The assistant shifted nervously. They've been trying for nearly 30 minutes. The investors are already being escorted to the executive conference center. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before standing. I can look. I cannot promise anything. Victoria nodded once. That is all I would ask. Together, they walked through the executive corridor where framed photographs celebrated decades of innovation. Employees stopped their conversations as they watched their chief executive walking beside the maintenance applicant instead of the senior technology staff. Curious whispers floated quietly through the hallway. Why is the janitor candidate going upstairs? Did someone make a mistake? Ethan ignored every glance. His attention drifted instead to a family photograph resting on a receptionist desk. A little boy smiled beside a homemade science project while his mother wrapped an arm around him. Ethan smiled almost invisibly. It reminded him of Lily building a cardboard solar system at their kitchen table only a few weeks earlier. The elevator doors opened onto the Executive Innovation Center. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline, while several engineers surrounded a wall-sized digital display filled with warning messages and simulation errors. Laptops covered the conference table. Half-empty coffee cups testified to growing frustration. The chief technology officer noticed Victoria and hurried over. We have isolated 3 possible failures, but every correction creates another one. He finally noticed Ethan standing quietly. Beside her, who is this? A job applicant, Victoria answered. Several engineers exchanged puzzled looks. One forced a polite smile. With respect, this is not really the place for interviews. Ethan spoke before Victoria could respond. He is right. I do not belong here. Victoria turned toward him. Not yet, but perhaps you can still help. Ethan walked slowly toward the main display without touching anything. He simply watched lines of diagnostic information flow across the screen while listening carefully to the rhythm of cooling fans inside the equipment rack. Nearly a full minute passed without anyone speaking. Finally, he asked a simple question. When was the backup synchronization last completed? One engineer frowned. Around 6 this morning. Ethan gently shook his head. No, the report is showing the scheduled time, not the successful completion. The room grew quiet. Another engineer quickly checked the system logs. His eyes widened. He is right. The backup never actually finished. Ethan nodded politely. Then the simulation is probably searching for data that does not exist. He still had not touched a keyboard. Victoria watched him with growing amazement. There was no arrogance in his voice, no desire to impress anyone, only the calm patience of someone solving a puzzle because people depended on the answer. standing beside the window, she suddenly remembered another sentence her father had repeated years ago. You will recognize true wisdom because it never needs to announce itself. And as Ethan finally stepped toward the console with the same quiet confidence he had carried since entering the building that morning, Victoria began to wonder if destiny had walked through her front doors disguised in the humble clothes of a father simply trying to earn an honest living for his daughter. Every conversation in the Executive Innovation Center faded into silence as Ethan rested his fingertips lightly on the keyboard. He did not rush. He did not sigh dramatically or ask everyone to step aside. Instead, he read every line on the screen with the patience of a craftsman studying the grain of old wood before making the first careful cut. The engineers watched with folded arms, uncertain whether to be curious or skeptical. One of them finally spoke. The synchronization logs have already been reviewed 3 times. Ethan nodded politely without looking away from the display. The logs are telling you what the system expected to happen. I am looking for what actually happened. Another engineer leaned closer. What is the difference? Ethan answered softly. Computers report instructions. Small details reveal reality. He opened a maintenance panel hidden several menus beneath the primary diagnostics, a location few people in the room even knew existed. Several lines of archived data appeared, each stamped with times from the previous night. Ethan smiled almost imperceptibly. There it is. The chief technology officer stepped forward. What did you find? Ethan pointed toward a sequence buried deep inside the records. The automated update completed successfully, but one legacy authorization certificate expired 12 seconds before the synchronization began. The system has been trying to protect itself ever since. The room became still. One engineer quickly compared the information with his own laptop and slowly lowered his hands from the keyboard. That cannot be right. 30 seconds later, his expression changed completely. It is right. Another engineer whispered in disbelief. We never even checked that archive. Ethan remained calm. Most people would not. It is an old security layer. New software rarely looks back unless someone tells it to. Victoria stood quietly near the conference table, watching less the solution itself than the man delivering it. There was no pride in his posture, no satisfaction at proving anyone wrong, only quiet purpose. Ethan restored the authorization certificate, restarted a single background service, and waited. One by one, the warning messages disappeared. The simulation screens returned to life. 3-dimensional production models rotated smoothly across the enormous display as though nothing had ever gone wrong. At that exact moment, the conference room doors opened and several international investors entered with warm greetings, completely unaware that a major demonstration had been only moments away from collapse. The chief technology officer looked at Victoria with visible relief. Everything is operational. Victoria nodded politely before turning toward Ethan. Thank you. Ethan simply smiled. I'm glad your guests will have the presentation they traveled to see. He stepped away from the console as though his work had ended the moment the problem disappeared. One investor glanced toward the display and laughed pleasantly. Excellent timing. Your engineering team is impressive. Before anyone else could answer, Ethan quietly picked up the visitor badge hanging around his neck. If you will excuse me, I believe my interview is probably finished. He started walking toward the elevator without waiting for recognition or applause. Victoria watched him leave, her thoughts racing faster than at any board meeting she had ever attended. As the elevator doors slowly closed, she looked once more at the application folder still resting in her hand. Beneath his name, she noticed a faded reference number she had overlooked before. It matched the numbering system used in her father's private engineering archives. Her heart skipped. This was no coincidence. Somewhere inside the company's oldest records was a story that could explain why the most quietly brilliant man she had ever met had arrived asking only for a janitor's job. The elevator doors closed quietly behind Ethan as they carried him toward the lower floors. But Victoria remained standing in the executive conference center, unable to take her eyes off the place where he had been only seconds before. Around her, investors praised the flawless presentation executives exchanged relieved smiles, and engineers hurried to prepare the next demonstration. Yet none of those voices reached her clearly. Her thoughts had already traveled years into the past. "Excuse me for a moment," she said softly before leaving the conference room. She walked briskly through a private hallway leading to the executive archive, a secure library that had belonged to her father before his passing. Dust rested gently on leather-bound engineering journals, patent binders, and handwritten notebooks collected over 4 decades. She unlocked a walnut cabinet marked Early Automation Research and searched until she found a thick blue folder labeled Project Horizon. Carefully opening it, she froze. The first page carried a familiar signature written in dark blue ink. Ethan Caldwell. Beneath the name appeared dozens of handwritten calculations, elegant diagrams, and detailed notes explaining an industrial architecture that had become the foundation of countless manufacturing systems across the country. Folded inside the folder was a faded letter addressed to her father. Victoria unfolded it with trembling hands. The paper had yellowed with age, but the words remained clear. "Harold, I appreciate your offer, but my wife has become seriously ill. My daughter needs both of us more than the industry needs another invention. Please continue building something that helps ordinary families. That will always matter more than recognition." There was no bitterness in the letter. No regret, only quiet love and unwavering purpose. Victoria closed her eyes as memories returned. She had been 16 when her father first mentioned Ethan Caldwell. He had never called him the smartest engineer he had known. Instead, he had said something much simpler. "If I could trust only one man with the future of this company, I would trust Ethan." She opened another folder containing newspaper clippings from years ago. One headline announced that Ethan Caldwell had suddenly withdrawn from every public project. Another speculated that he had accepted secret government work. None of them mentioned the truth waiting inside the handwritten letter. He had simply walked away to care for his family. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Richard Benson stood outside the archive. "Ms. Langford, I thought you should know that Mr. Caldwell was preparing to leave. He said he did not want to interrupt your busy day." Victoria looked at the old letter once more before carefully placing it back into the folder. "Where is he now?" "Probably at the front entrance." Victoria immediately walked toward the elevator. Downstairs, Ethan stood near the revolving doors, checking the time on his old watch once again. Lily's school dismissal was approaching, and missing it had never been an option. Richard handed him a temporary employment packet. "The hiring process still needs executive approval, but I believe we will have good news soon." Ethan smiled gratefully. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity." Just as he reached for the door handle, he heard hurried footsteps echo across the marble lobby. Victoria crossed the floor without concern for the curious eyes watching her. She stopped only a few feet away, holding the weathered blue folder close to her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with genuine respect replacing every trace of corporate formality, she quietly asked, "Mr. Caldwell, why did the man who changed modern manufacturing choose to disappear without telling the world where he went?" The question lingered between them as the afternoon sunlight streamed through the towering glass walls, casting long reflections across the marble floor. Employees slowed their pace without realizing it. A receptionist stopped sorting packages. Even the security guard who had first directed Ethan toward the service entrance quietly looked over. No one understood why their chief executive was standing before a maintenance applicant with such unmistakable respect. Ethan lowered his eyes to the worn leather watch on his wrist before looking back at Victoria. His voice remained calm, almost gentle, because the world always gives you another opportunity to build a company. It does not always give your daughter another chance to have her father beside her. Victoria said nothing. She simply listened. Ethan continued. "When my wife became ill, every meeting, every patent, every interview suddenly became very small. After she passed away, Lily was all I had left. I could spend my life chasing applause, or I could make sure one little girl never had to wonder whether her father would come home." The lobby fell completely still. Richard Benson quietly removed his glasses, pretending to clean them while hiding the emotion in his eyes. One of the younger engineers looked toward the floor, remembering how quickly he had dismissed the quiet applicant. Only hours earlier, Victoria slowly opened the weathered blue folder and showed Ethan the letter he had written to her father years before. "He kept this until the day he died," she said softly. Ethan smiled with genuine surprise. Harold never threw anything away if it reminded him of good people. Victoria laughed quietly through misting eyes. "That sounds exactly like him." She turned another page and revealed an old photograph. Two younger men stood beside an early prototype assembly system, smiling proudly. One was her father. The other was unmistakably Ethan, although his hair was darker and his face carried the hopeful confidence of a man just beginning to change an industry. Several executives who had gathered nearby leaned closer in disbelief. The chief technology officer stared at the photograph, then back at Ethan. "That cannot be possible," he whispered. "We study these projects during orientation." Victoria nodded. "Yes, we all did." She gently closed the folder. "The difference is that none of us ever imagined the architect would someday walk through our front doors asking for a janitor position." Silence settled over everyone again. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that appears when truth quietly rearranges every assumption in the room. Ethan slipped his application folder beneath his arm. "I never expected anyone here to recognize my name," he admitted. "Most people have forgotten it, and that has been perfectly all right with me." Victoria looked directly into his eyes. "My father did not forget. Neither did this company. We simply forgot where to look." Ethan glanced once more at his watch. "I should go. Lily finishes school in less than 40 minutes, and traffic across the river can be unpredictable." Victoria noticed that even now, after everything that had just been revealed, his greatest concern remained reaching his daughter on time. Not money, not recognition, not opportunity. She stepped slightly aside so he could pass, but before he reached the revolving doors, she spoke one sentence that caused every executive within earshot to stop breathing for a moment. "Mr. Caldwell, tomorrow morning I am not inviting you back as a maintenance applicant. I am asking you to return as the man who helped build the foundation of everything standing around us today." For a long moment, Ethan did not answer. The revolving doors turned quietly as afternoon visitors entered and left the building, but the lobby itself seemed frozen in respectful silence. He looked at Victoria with the same calm expression he had carried all day. "That is a generous offer," he said softly, "but before I accept any position, there's something you should know." Victoria nodded. "Please." Ethan smiled gently. "If I come back, I cannot be the man I used to be. I will not chase titles. I will not spend every night in conference rooms. At 3:15 every afternoon, I leave to pick up my daughter from school. Some days she needs help with homework. Some evenings she simply needs someone to ask how her day went. That responsibility comes before every meeting, every contract, and every promotion." Not a single executive questioned his words. Victoria looked around the lobby at the people who had quietly gathered during the conversation. She realized they were witnessing something far more valuable than another successful business decision. They were watching a man define success without mentioning money even once. She stepped closer and extended her hand. "Then let us build something that respects both excellence and family. My father believed companies should serve people, not the other way around. Somewhere along the journey, I think I forgot that lesson." Ethan accepted her handshake with quiet gratitude. "Your father never forgot." Victoria smiled warmly. "Neither will I." The following morning, the entire executive team assembled in the Innovation Center, expecting an important announcement. Engineers, managers, and department directors filled the room while sunlight poured through the glass walls overlooking the city. Victoria walked onto the stage carrying the same weathered blue folder from the archives. She opened it briefly before looking toward the audience. "Yesterday," she began, "our company was reminded that greatness often arrives without asking for recognition. We were prepared to hire a janitor. Instead, we rediscovered one of the people whose ideas helped shape our foundation." She invited Ethan onto the stage. The applause began slowly, then spread through the room until every employee was standing. Ethan looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. When the applause finally faded, Victoria offered him the position of senior strategic advisor with complete flexibility to honor his commitment as a father. Ethan thought quietly before answering. I accept on one condition. I would like to spend one day each month working beside the maintenance team. They deserve the same respect as every executive in this building because clean floors, safe hallways, and honest work allow every other success to happen. A smile spread across the room. Richard Benson applauded first. Soon everyone joined him again. Weeks later, the culture inside Langford Technologies began to change in quiet but meaningful ways. Executives greeted custodians by name. Mentorship programs expanded. Flexible schedules for parents became a company priority. Above the entrance to the Innovation Center, Victoria placed a simple bronze plaque engraved with words taken from Ethan's old letter to her father. Build something that helps ordinary families. That will always matter more than recognition. Every afternoon at exactly 3:15, one office light on the executive floor switched off as Ethan left to pick up Lily. No one questioned it. No one asked him to stay 1 minute longer. They understood that the greatest achievement in the building was not hidden inside a patent, a billion-dollar contract, or an award. It was found in the quiet dignity of a father who had once walked through the front doors hoping only for honest work, and who reminded an entire company that the strongest legacy a person can leave behind is not the fortune they build, but the people they choose to love before everything else.